Good morning and welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. This is the second video I have recorded where I'm not wearing my clerical collar, and the reason is, as of recording, today is Halloween and my son has borrowed my only ironed clerical shirt and a clerical collar to take to his school for his Halloween costume. So I fully expect to hear from his teachers and from any of his fellow pupils that he spent the entire afternoon performing benedictions. As long as there's no exorcisms, I think we'll be okay. Today we're moving further afield from our usual tea haunts. We're moving to Nepal for the first time, and we're looking at an oolong. Not only that, it is a red oolong, so that's something of a change from our usual diet of low oxidation green oolongs. We are looking at a tea called Habre. I'm going to bring it up close. Undoubtedly it will be, well, I assume inverted, but at the very least you get a good look at the packaging. And if you look at the little animal at the top there, you might be able to guess that Habre is the local Nepali word for red panda. I had no idea that there were red pandas in Nepal, but apparently this area, Ilam, is a red panda conservation area. Having had a look at the packaging, I like its sort of simplicity. The name of the oolong, Habre, is in a sort of bold red and gold colour. There's writing underneath in gold. There's a white on black mountain range there, very simplistic. And the other sort of pop of colour is to highlight the best before and some other information, but also the wee red panda face there, very smiley, happy looking red panda, which is what we like. We're told this is 100 grams, and this explains why I'll do this at this point. You might be able to tell those are pretty dark beads, I like to call them, of tea. It's a rolled oolong, which is why you can fit 100 grams into a package of this size. They're dark, but the lighter shading is red. So you can tell this isn't dark because it's a charcoal roasted tea. That doesn't mean to say it hasn't been roasted at all. It's an autumn flush as well, which is picked between August and September, we're told on the back. There is a lot of very good information upon here. Details about what kind of colour to expect in the tea, some of the flavour profile or tasting notes. It's crispy, astringent, mellow, buttery, fruity with a reminiscent of wild berries. I think there's a lot to be said for that. And interestingly, it's called a progressive oxidized tea that changes with the seasons. In other words, I think a spring version of this tea would be much greener. It's something that you spot with, let's say, Darjeeling oolongs. First flush Darjeeling oolongs tend to be green, and second flush Darjeeling oolongs, I don't know about autumn as much, are much more oxidized. We also get some information here about the producer of this tea. The vendor, by the way, is the Discover Nepal Tea base out of Australia. I think I may have just said that, but there we go again. And the origin of this tea is artisan. That's important. There's a latitude and longitude. The elevation is between 1850 and 2100 meters. There's a rather amusing spelling mistake on the front, which suggests that the elevation ranges from 1850 meters to 21,000 meters. And I think if one very specific latitude and longitude set of coordinates moved up by 19,000 meters, I think that your tea farm is on the side of a cliff. So it's between 1800 to 2100 meters. The producer is Mai-Pokhari Tea Industry, and the location is Mai-Pokhari, which is in Ilam, which, if memory serves, is on the eastern end of Nepal, bordering Darjeeling. And the production is small-scale family farms. In other words, what we have here is a collective of small-scale tea farmers, and they've been brought together with Discover Nepal Tea working as, I don't want to say a middleman, because that tends to suggest something slightly more exploitative, but they were a broker. They were kind of sorting house For a variety of small-scale tea cooperatives in Nepal, not just tea cooperatives, there's at least 2 independent tea farms or single tea farms that they are selling. And one of those, the name of which I can't pronounce, also has its own website. Now, all of this is extremely good news because it's good to see any small-scale tea farmer getting a break, getting the opportunity to showcase what they produce. And Nepal tea, or tea from Nepal, really, is going through, I don't want to say a resurgence or a renaissance, as if they were more prominent and then became less prominent. It's more a case of, thanks to improvements in communication and in technology, a realization of the importance of small-scale loans and the importance of the individuality of a tea that comes from terroir, that comes from seasonality. There's been an emphasis on saying tea that comes from not just one nation, but this region, and not just this one region, but from a particular farm or collective of farms. So along with this Oolong tea, I bought another one. I think that's a spring harvest, but we'll see in a later video. And I bought a selection of white teas. And what I noticed is that the seasonality is really coming to the fore with those, because it's different processing methods of white tea from some of these different cooperatives. But not just that, we're talking about spring harvest versus autumn harvests, and so on and so forth. So all of that is good for tea producers, because seasonality as well as locality, terroir considerations, it's all good for people wanting to get a broader sense of what tea is like in Nepal and from a particular region. So I appreciate and approve of all of that. So let's move on to brewing our tea. The brewing instructions or parameters are 1 teaspoon of tea to 1 cup of water, 90 to 100 degrees centigrade. That sounds a little vague, but I weighed out a teaspoon of this tea and it comes out to 2.5 grams, more or less. And 250 milliliters tends to be a sort of unofficial standard for what a cup of water is. So you put those two things together and you have the standard 1 gram to 100 mils of water ratio. This morning I tried this tea for the first time, and I tried a small portion of it at 90 degrees and a small portion of it at 100. And without getting ahead of ourselves as to what the flavor profile is, I would say that 100 degrees was starting to bring out some of the tannins. And it's the presence of tannins in red oolongs that has tended to put me off them in the past, because if I wanted a tea with a flavor profile of black tea and with the tannins, I'd go with a black tea or a red tea, depending on where you are. But 90 degrees didn't have the tannin, so I'd be very interested to see if 95 degrees gives us a different tea profile, a flavor profile. I should also point out that the brewing time is 3 minutes. So I've actually got a large-scale teacup, I've got a teapot, that's all I need. Our transparent jug with a perfectly ordinary strainer, because I don't expect any leaves to come out of the spout. And I've got the weighing scales here, just so I can get the 500 mils of water. For a second there, I thought it wasn't going to work. That isn't something that I really need. So that's our 5 grams of tea, 95 degrees for the water. Let's get our 500 in. And we'll take it from there. There we go. An extra 8.4 grams of water, but I think we will cope. I'm just going to set my tablet. For a second I thought that wasn't going to work either. I may have to shave a few seconds off this time. There we go. I don't think 3 minutes is long enough that we need to worry about a tea cozy. So I read, before I actually bought these teas, I'd happened to be doing some reading about the tea industry in Nepal. And there's a sentence I never thought I would hear myself say. And I'm pleased to say that some of the concerns for, I don't want to say social justice, but some of the concerns that we find more prominent in the tea industry for giving the smaller producers a shot, or giving them more say and more control over the production of their tea, is really coming to the fore. Now, what I'm about to say, I don't want to say happens with any frequency, but in every industry, there are always people who are somewhat, well, they don't have the usual moral scruples. And at one time, Nepalese tea was being bundled up and labeled and sold off as Darjeeling tea. I can understand how that was possible, because you're looking at the same climatic conditions. As I say, Ilam, I think, is right next door to Darjeeling. In fact, I think it's right up against the Gopaldara tea estate, one of whose products we've looked at already. So you can imagine, unless the varietals of tea they're using are radically different, you're going to produce a tea which has similar broad characteristics. However, there's been a possibility for these small-scale farmers to come to the fore, partly through use of things like microloans, so that one of the things that was holding small producers back was that they couldn't afford, even at a collective level, the machinery that's needed for processing tea. However, with things like microloans working collectively, they've been able to get some of this machinery. Along with that, there's the infrastructure of globalism. And, as much as I might be a critic of globalism in some respects, the fact that I, over here in the UK, can have access to a tea from Nepal, and not just Nepalese tea as some sort of homogenized product, but from an area so specific that the latitude and the longitude is provided, I think that's wonderful. Incidentally, if you go to the Discover Nepal Tea website, and I'll put that below, there's more information about all of the collectives who are represented by them. So I think that is wonderful news. I'm going to start giving this tea... Oh, we're down to 3 minutes. That was wonderful. What I'm going to do is give this tea a bit of a shugal, because it's pretty reluctant for the leaves to unfurl. But I think 3 minutes was a pretty spot-on timing. I don't want to brew it for any longer. So let's see what this is like. Some of that tea is unfurled, but it hasn't unfurled to a great extent. But I wasn't really expecting it to. There is the colour of the tea. I'll let you take the first look, see if I can get some light. There you go. It's quite pale for red oolong. It looks a little bit like the colour of other autumn flush teas that I've seen from Darjeeling, so I don't suppose there's much of a surprise there. I would say that's a sort of bronze colour, maybe a yellowy bronze colour. The smell, it's not a very strong smell. A kind of roasted quality to it, but I think that's just a kind of earthiness. I didn't mention, but the dry leaves have a sort of sweet and earthy smell to them. It's sweet and it's earthy and it's slightly roasted. Let's see what it's like to drink. Bearing in mind, I've tried this at 90 degrees and at 100, so this is new to me. The earthiness is coming through more on the smell from the cup. It is full-bodied. Interestingly, in the front it says complex and full-bodied. And that's certainly the case. There's nothing insipid about this. I'm not talking in terms of mouthfeel, but it is incredibly satisfying. The taste lingers, which is always a good sign. There is a slightly roasted, earthy quality, as I've already said. It's sweet. There is a fruitiness to it. And all of that is pretty much what the flavour profile suggested. It certainly hasn't leached any tannins out. So 95 degrees, you can push this tea to 95 without worrying about the tannins. There's none of the drying out of the mouth that I would expect with the presence of tannins at all in a tea. So that's good. Provided the caffeine level doesn't have me bouncing, I think I will happily finish off that pot. I might be tempted to give the tea more of a stir partway through. If I was brewing it again, if I can show you this is one of the little beads of tea and it's barely steeped at all. When I was using this transparent jug to brew the tea earlier, I was really giving it a few good stirs. So I would expect to get more flavour, but not more tannins if I tried that again. So let's come to our summary. I think this tea is to be commended because it's an effort to allow smaller scale producers to show what they can do. I don't want to say underdogs, but anything that allows producers to flourish, but also allows consumers like you, if you're interested in tea, and myself, to try something different, to try something that's very much shaped by locality and seasonality. That's all to the good. I've learned more about Nepal through this product than I knew before. Is it easily available? Well, I was able to access this website, unsurprisingly, all the way in the UK. The tea came relatively quickly. I have seen other teas from Ilam, from this region, available on a variety of websites, but not necessarily with more specific detail. I've seen tea from individual estates in Nepal also available on a variety of websites. So as much as Habre from this particular collective might be a little more elusive, although I confess I haven't looked too hard at where else the tea from Mai-Pokhari is available, the one thing I will say is in terms of the taste, did I enjoy it? Yes, it's lovely. It could do with a good stirring halfway through just to bring out a little bit more flavour, but that's the only difficulty to add to it. So it's easy to brew, it tastes good, it's interesting. Its cousins, if we can put it that way, in terms of Nepalese tea, are not hard to get hold of. And so, with the proviso that I haven't quite prepared this tea to do it full justice, I can give this tea a hearty recommendation. And with that, it simply remains for me to say happy steeping and God bless.